Hi, this is Suzabelle from Patchwork Chicken Studio, and I've been busy working on baby quilts, and been busy with fall shows, so it's now January, and I have babies that need quilts. So one baby is already here, two babies are being born in March, and so I'm kind of hustling along here to get these done. So this is the third of the three that I needed to make, and it's time to do the binding. And over the last few days, I've been sending pictures to my mom, showing her my progress on these quilts, and I'll show one under the machine that I'm doing the binding on. And she said, "Oh," she said, "yours look so nice. Can you do a video and show me how that works?" Sure, happy to. So one of these days I'll actually get the quilt construction video done. I've talked about it for months. I need to just dig that up and get busy on it. But this one of my standard little 4-patch quilts. And this one is all done. It's been quilted, because I quilt by tucking or tagging here with a zigzag on the corners. It's ready to be bound, and the binding is actually not hard, but I had to do it a bunch of times before I really felt like I had it under control. And I was going to go ahead and show how I do it with this quilt, but I've already cut the binding and stitched it, and so we're going to use that later in this video. What I wanted to show you was how to create the binding first before it ever gets to that stage, to this smaller stage here. There's some prep work that has to be done. And so this is a 3-inch strip of cotton fabric, and this I'm going to actually use this on a placemat that I'm working on later, so I'm not going to be wasting this. But what I want to do is to create a really long strip. You can see this is a lot. There's a lot of it here. So that I don't have to stop and make seams as I go. That's not going to work well. Plus, it's very time consuming. So what I have is my two pieces here. For this strip, I think it was about 8 pieces that got put together. But I want to show you how to seam these together. Now, I used to just stick them together, make a little straight seam right here. And that was fine, but it's a big chunk to make my machine go over when I'm doing the actual binding. So it's better to give this a diagonal stitch, a diagonal seam, and then you're not running over all those thicknesses at once. It's much more graduated. So I have my 2 pieces. They're nice and square, and I'm going to lay right side up on this strip and have it stretched out. This strip is stretched out in front of me. It's laying on my lap. And what I want to do is to overlap this onto the piece that's facing up. And so what I have, I can't see the corners. I can see this little corner right here. But what I want to do is to stitch from this corner to this corner. And what this does is create a diagonal seam. You'll see it when I get it done. So my tools for this job are a ruler or a straight edge of some kind. This is my big fat ruler that I like. And I want to lay that ruler from corner to corner, so I can see the little bit of corner from the bottom one sticking out here, and I can see just the edge of the bottom fabric up here on this side. I use my pencil, and I'm just going to make a mark. If you do this and you don't exactly get it in the right place, just redraw it. Nobody's going to see this line. This is underneath. It's hidden. Now, if you're a messy sewer, you might want to pin this before you actually stitch it, and I'm going to pin it. Normally I wouldn't, but I'm going to pin it because I'm talking and I'm not paying attention. So I'm just going to pin this to hold this in place until I actually get it stitched. And you can see my corner right here of the bottom fabric is right there, and there's my corner at the top. So I want this to go under my machine nice and straight, or it's not going to work. So let me re-aim my camera just a smidgy bit here. So from this corner to this corner on my pencil line is where I'm going to stitch. And I did this, like I said, about 8 times for that other piece that's over there. So I'm just going to stitch through here. So I've stitched from corner to corner. I'm going to snip my threads here and get rid of my pin, which I don't need. So now if I open this up, you can see that's really, really nice. It's not perfect, but it doesn't matter. That's going to be all hidden when it's done. But I don't want this lump of fabric underneath there. So I'm going to use a pair of scissors to just snip this off so it has a regular 1/4 inch seam allowance. Does not have to be perfect. So don't be going dragging out the ruler and fixing it to be perfect. It just needs to be trimmed down so that when this folds flat, this is going to be nice and smooth, and that's what you want. And then my next step is to take this to the iron and iron this in half. So basically it gets folded over and you iron that entire long strip, however many you've made together, before you bind your baby quilt. Now my baby quilt is 40 inches by 44 inches or 48 inches. So I have enough binding for that quilt. So you have to think about that when you're measuring how many of these strips you need to put together and to iron to be able to do an entire quilt without stopping. Now I'm going to change thread in my machine. I'll be right back and we will start the binding process on this baby quilt. Okay, so we're back. I have rethreaded the machine with the appropriate color because green wouldn't work on this. And I have my quilt laid out on my table, and I'm going to try really hard not to bump my camera, which is sitting just right off the edge of the table. But this is my binding strip, and I have my raw edges here. This has all been ironed and seamed up, so I have a lot. Like 8 strips. There's one of those seams right there. You can see it. So what I want to do to start my binding is I can start anywhere on the quilt. Do not start on the corner. You want to start in the middle of one of the edges. The corner is messy enough without any help from me. So I always start kind of in the middle of one side, and it really doesn't matter which side. Now some people will go pin this and use the little clips. I have the little clips. These little clips, but I don't like to have to stop and pull things out. And this is a simple straight stitch that we're doing here. And if I can't handle a straight stitch, then I don't know what I'm doing as a sewist. So anyway, I won't use these clips. I won't use pins. If you're still kind of a novice and you feel uncomfortable with it, you can go through and pin this. Just understand that because there's batting here, you may have to adjust your pinning as you go. You may have to stop and readjust because batting takes up more space when you're putting it under the needle, and it can push this, kind of push this ahead and kind of get out of alignment from where your pins are, and you don't want any tucks or anything in here. So that's another reason for me to just do this outright. I'm going to leave a piece here that is not attached. So about 2-inch or 2.5-inch piece, I'm going to actually start farther down. And I need this when I'm joining the binding back up at the other end, which we will see later in the video. So I'm going to go ahead and get my machine all ready to go, and I'm set for a 1/4-inch seam. I'm using a vintage machine, a Singer 319. It has zigzag. It has some fancy stitches. It's kind of a cool machine. And I know I have a 1/4 of an inch if my needle's set to the middle of my presser foot. I'm using a regular zigzag presser foot, which measures a 1/4 inch for me. Big time saver for me to do that. Also, if I were using a seam guide, that will work as well. So I could use a magnetic seam guide here, which would hold this in place. But if you're doing that, you can't be using clips or pins. You will have to stop and pull those out before your fabric gets up to where the magnetic seam guide is. So I'm not messing with the seam guide. I don't need it. I will do this on my own. So I'm going to go ahead and start this and let you see how it works. And I will not make you watch me go around the entire quilt, but I will stop and then we'll come back and we'll do this little finish here so you can see how that works. So a little bit of a back stitch and off we go. And this again, this is the quick part. And I just want to make sure that my binding and my quilt top and back and batting are all matching up to make this long seam. All right, I have zippity-doo-dah through the whole thing, and I'm back at my beginning. Remember this little piece I had left kind of sitting out? And this is the rest. I still have some pieces of binding left, but this is, you can see I stopped. I have this spot here. And so the first thing I want to do is to trim this top piece to about 2.5 or 3 inches. I need it to come about to the point of where the stitching started for that underneath piece. Okay. And you can get up and iron this and mess around with it, but I just pretty much do this all with finger pressing. But what I want to do is to overlap one of these inside the other one. It really doesn't matter which, but I tend to find I get a better result if this is the one that stays on the outside and this one overlaps inside. Now we don't want this raw edge here, so that's a problem. So the reason I cut this so long is that I can fold down this bottom edge. So this is going to stay in place right now, and I'm going to open this up with my fingers. I have so many thread snivels. I'm going to open this up with my fingers and turn down about 3/4 of an inch, maybe an inch. Doesn't really matter. I just want a good chunk of it inside, and I'm going to fold this over and finger press it, which means I'm really squeezing it with my fingers, and then fold it in half and take a look at that and see if that looks pretty good. And it is pretty good. Sometimes I got to make some adjustments because this part is going to show on the outside of the quilt, not like obvious unless somebody's going around looking at everything super, supersonic eyes, but I still want it to look neat and tidy. So I have this folded over, so we have no raw edge here, and then I'm going to tuck this other one, the beginning piece, inside there. And this you may want to pin. It does kind of help a little bit for getting it settled, and if I work with it on a flat surface, that helps too. So what I want to do is to tuck this inside the overlapping piece, get this all stretched out really nice, and make sure it has a nice fit. I want it to have a really nice fit because I don't want any bumps or bubbles or tucks in here because that creates thickness. It makes it harder to do the other part of the second part of the binding. So I have this in place kind of the way I want it, and I'm going to do a little adjustment here. And this is one of those times tweezers are really handy in my sewing room. This one is off by just a little bit. I want to pull it down a little underneath there and get it flatter. And again, finger pressing. That's basically all I'm doing, is just kind of mashing it with my fingers. You can take it over to the ironing board and do it. I find I don't need to do that. I just need to get it in place. So once I have it the way I want it, looking neat and tidy, then this goes back on the machine. And again, you can pin this. If it's not laying flat enough, feel free to pin it. Clips are not going to be your friend in this case. You want a pin that you can run over with your sewing machine. And I know that's controversial. However, I sew over my pins. So far my machines have survived just fine. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch this last little piece of open. Everything else is stitched down. So I just want to get this last piece done. I'm overlapping my stitching, and I've got this piece done. Now this will come apart. This part this will just come apart if I don't stitch it down. So my next step is to flip this up, and you can see flip it up right that way, and I'm going to put it under my presser foot. I want to get this nice and flat and neat and tidy, nice and straight. And I'm going to stitch this little opening closed. And it's just a plain old straight stitch, nothing fancy, but this will keep it from opening up. You don't want it to open up. So I'm just going to stitch right over that opening. Back stitch a little bit, and now I have sewn that down so it's not going to come loose or let things fall in or be able to be picked apart by little fingers, because remember, this is a quilt for a baby or a toddler. I'm going to snip all my threads here, and now I have this binding ready for the second step. Okay, so my binding is all stitched on from the top. So we have our binding this way. So my next step is to do the second part of the binding. And that's going to happen with me folding this over to the back and giving me a nice thin little binder here on the top and on the back. And it's covering up all of this. This is a mess, right? You wouldn't want this hanging out. This is your backing, your batting, and your top are all contained in there. And so I want to cover that up with the binding, and I'm going to use a zigzag stitch or a fancy stitch. This machine does fancy stitches, so I'll be using a fancy stitch, but a zigzag will work for this just fine. You can set a very wide zigzag fairly long stitch length, and it'll do the job that it needs to do. What you're trying to do is to bind this on here so it's not going to come up, it's not going to let anything out, it's not going to ravel. We're not going to have any problems, supposedly. Now you can pin this, you can use the clips. I don't. It's very time consuming to stop and take those off and then keep going and stop and take those off because you're sewing 2 to 3 inches at a time. That's just too much trouble for me, and I need to get these done. So I'm going to go ahead and just eyeball it as I go. And in this case, I put my stitch kind of in the middle of the presser foot, and I am using a kind of a loopy thing, an up and down. Looks like, I don't know what that looks like. But anyway, that's the one I'm using there to enclose this quilt. But you can see this machine has several fancy stitches, and I just play around and get the length that I want of the stitch and how wide it is and all of that. So we're going to do this, and I'm going to only go maybe 7 or 8 inches because I want to show you what it looks like on both sides. And the machine is noisy, so I'm going to try not to talk while it is going. Make sure that your quilt is being supported well by your table. You don't want to be fighting with anything you don't have to. And again, do not start on the corners. Start in the middle of a side and go from there. You're going to have a much better result. The other thing I want to say is don't be afraid to rip it out. If you stitch it wrong and something's sticking out and it's not right, just get out your seam ripper and take it out. You're going to have a much better product. You're going to feel better about it. Yes, it's work, but just look at it as a learning experience. And I'm learning all the time because I'm always ripping stuff out. So anyway, we're going to get started. The machine is going to do the work. I'm just sitting here feeding the fabric through. We're going to go just a little bit farther. Now this is my do or die moment. I'm going to take a look and see if it did what it was supposed to do. And it has. And I don't want to take this off the machine. So we're going to zoom in just a little bit here so you can see this. So there's the stitches on the back. You can see those loopies. And there's the stitches on the front. You can see those loopies. And I will just keep going. I won't make you watch all of that. But this is the stitching that I want. And it's holding this down, covering up all that loose stuff that's in the back, which nobody wants to see. We don't want any ravels. We want this to be nice and enclosed. And I will just keep going around. And like I said, you can use a zigzag. So zigzag works fine. You have any kind of a zigzag machine will do this. This is pretty simple. I think, no, I didn't go over a seam, but those seams are here. Those triangle seams that I did, the machine will go right over those with no problem because they're nice and flat instead of being a big bump. So that was the reason for doing that. So there'll be a picture of this quilt when I'm done at the end. Not right now because I got to keep stitching, but that's how I do the bindings. Easy. I think it's easy. It took me a while to get used to it. It took me a while to figure out how to do it without messing the back up, because I wouldn't have it folded over far enough. And this is where in the beginning using pins or clips may be helpful to keep this folded over where you need it to be folded over. But this stitching is kind of forgiving too in a way, and it'll, if you're off by a little bit, 1/8 of an inch, it's not going to matter, but if you're off by 1/4, it's going to show. So anyway, try it. Let me know how it works for you, if this is a technique that you're going to use moving forward. I could use this on anything. I could use this on placemats, hot pads, really anything I wanted to. Baby quilts, obviously. Larger size quilts, yes, absolutely. I can hand bind these quilts. Takes me about 3 hours to hand bind a baby quilt, but they're not going to last as long. Machine stitching is the way to go with that. So anyway, thanks for watching.